This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. We're on Long Island, New York for this episode of the podcast. You know, I was thinking about it as I was getting ready for this one. I don't know that I've ever come out to Long Island to actually record an episode of the podcast. So maybe this is the first Long Island episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast. For many years, I lived in Long Island City, Queens, which is actually on the island of Long Island, but is considered, it's not just considered, it is part of New York City. But we are not in New York City for this one. We are on Long Island. I jumped on the Long Island Railroad and rode out from the city out here. I have through living in Long Island City, spent a lot of time out on Long Island, riding mountain bikes, going to the beach, eating lobster, all the things that you would do on Long Island. And it's a beautiful place. Obviously, quite a bit of bedroom communities that feed New York City, quite a lot of business itself. When you get out, further east on the island, quite a bit of agriculture, and so Long Island has a reputation for the Hamptons and all of that kind of stuff. And, it's a much more diverse and interesting place than I think gets communicated around that. But anyway, I digress. Joining me for this episode, recorded live here in Glen Cove, Long Island, is Frank Bilello from Noble Savage. Welcome to the podcast, Frank.
Thank you for having me, Jamie.
Frank, you sent me an email a couple of weeks ago, and you're like, "Hey, man, I enjoy the podcast, and I would love to share a beer with you." And I was like, thanks. I don't know when I'm ever going to be out on Long Island, and just kind of let that one go. And then last week, I emailed you back and like, "Hey, funny story. I know I said I wouldn't know. I didn't know when I was going to be here next, but that is going to be next week." And so here I am. Like I said, hopped on the Long Island Railroad, took it out here, and we are sitting down in Noble Savage. Some things I did not realize after you emailed me as we were talking about this is that you, in the recent Untapped Community Awards, in terms of hazy IPA, best hazy IPAs brewed in the United States, knocked down both silver and bronze behind Treehouse for your functional art hazy IPA and your cognitive capacity hazy IPA. Functional art with a 4.59 average and cognitive capacity with a 4.55 average. Not too shabby.
Thank you.
That's a thing. And, in this world of New England style IPA, obviously there's, you've got some serious fans out there and folks that love what you do. You're brewing on a very small scale here, 5-barrel brew house, some small tanks out there, some 2.5 barrel fermenters, 5-barrel fermenters, like not making tons of beer out of this. Like it is very much focused on, small scale production, feeding the tap room and making some cans out there for the hardcore fans. But you also have a creative and interesting way of approaching these beers, especially in this hazy IPA space, where you let the beer speak to you and you make some decisions about how you're going to treat that based on that taste and sensory approach. We're going to talk about how you do this creatively and how you come up with such interesting and compelling results. Before we do that, for years, G&D Chillers has chilled the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across North America and beyond. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years because brewing doesn't stop at 5 o'clock, nor do they. They use quality components, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation. With their 24/7 service and support, your brewery will never stop. Remote monitor your chiller for simple and fast access to all of the information you need and gain peace of mind your operation is running smoothly. And brewers, what if your yeast could do more than just ferment? With Berkeley Yeast, it can. They bioengineer ordinary strains and make them extraordinary, enhancing the flavors you want and eliminating the ones you don't. Now, in addition to competitive pricing, they're offering free overnight shipping on 5+ barrel pitches. Try it out. If you don't love it, they'll happily refund you. So why settle for ordinary when you can brew with better yeast? Visit berkeleyyeast.com to learn more and start brewing with science on your side. Also, a day in the life of a brewer is packed enough as it is, so why not let Old Orchard assist with R&D? Custom blend development is available through their innovative R&D lab. Their bulk division supplies a wide range of beverage segments, making it a one-stop shop for flavoring beer and beyond. More information and free samples are waiting at oldorchard.com/brewer. That's oldorchard.com/brewer. All right, Frank, give us your story. You know how this starts. You're a podcast listener.
Around 2014, I was working for an environmental engineering firm, and I started getting all these homebrew magazines, and it really piqued my interest. And on a whim, I quit my job and spent all the money I had on a brewery. I built a brewery at my home and never looked back. Started off on the electric brewery. Shout out to Cal in Canada. Yeah, started doing that. Did it for 2 years. Started writing the business plan.
You quit your job and you were just homebrewing. I mean, you had to have some income at that time.
No, I was just working for the engineering firm, and quit my job. Thought I could make something of this, and started writing the business plan.
That's serious, man.
Thank you. I incorporated the business in 2016, and took me until 2018. Found the spot and started building, and then we opened June 1st of 2019.
That's quite a leap of faith to go from homebrewing to like, hey, let's open up a brewery.
Indeed.
And then you also tackled this other crazy project, which was renovating this old building here in Glen Cove, and unearthing this beautiful building that we're in now from the shell that had been built over and around it. Beautiful walls, beautiful tin ceiling, and all of this stuff that had been covered up through renovation after renovation after renovation. But building out a new building, building a brewery is hard enough, but renovating an old building to get it up to brewery status is an additional challenge.
It was a major renovation and a significant challenge, but we were very fortunate in many ways. And there was plenty of reclaimed material in the building that we see now.
Sure. So what was it that drove that that craft beer bug? What was it that got you into homebrewing? And what was it like? There's some drive there, right? You're a beer fanatic also, and were seeking out beers at the time, and then that transitioned into wanting to make beer for yourself.
I always wanted to be my own boss, and even as a young kid, I was always making potions at my grandmother's house, and I don't know, something about it just really piqued my interest, and I thought I can have a go at this. I remember sitting in Single Cut and looking around thinking, why can't I have this? And then I set out and built the brewery.
So you live a town or two away, so you're kind of close to Glen Cove here. Why? What was it about Long Island that that said, hey, this is where the business should be?
Well, I was born in Glen Cove, spent half my childhood up the road, and Glen Cove was poised for a brewery. Things were happening and changing. It looked like a great opportunity in Glen Cove, and so I bit the bullet.
Now you opened up, not too far before COVID then hit, and changed a lot of the story here. That kind of pushed some soul searching on your side.
Absolutely, it's been a tough road, but we're still here.
So then tell me about the hazy IPA thing. This is, you're a brewer, as we've talked, like we're drinking lager right now, but the thing that people, as brewers do, right? But the thing that the consumer world out there and the beer nerd world knows you for, and the untapped world certainly is hazy IPA. What drove your interest in that whole category?
I started off drinking predominantly IPA, and that was the style I enjoyed most, and I just wanted to be the best. So I kept brewing it and tweaking it and refining it, and here we are.
What were some of your inspirations in those early days? How'd you figure it out? Yeah, there were, like, especially in those earlier days, like there wasn't just, vast amounts of information out there about how people are brewing hazy IPA.
Really just trial and error, going from brewery to brewery, tasting different beers, seeing what I liked and trying to analyze the beer. Single cut, Barrier, Sand City, just going to all those breweries and tasting it and thinking, how can I reverse engineer this beer?
How'd you build that knowledge base in order to do that? I'm curious about that. Because being able to, like, wanting to reverse engineer it and being able to actually reverse engineer it are two different things. You need to understand, the mechanics at play there, the ingredients at play, and how all of those work.
Sure. Well, I had the brewery at my house, and I had 4 years to start tweaking things, and lots of reading, lots of brewing books and knowledge that I gained from that, and just the continuous process of brewing and seeing what worked and what didn't work, and ultimately opening the brewery in Glen Cove. We're a farm brewery, so I found Hudson Valley malt and really fell in love with the malt. And I do believe that it's a big part of the reason why the beer is so tasty and sought after.
Interesting. So let's talk about that. And I have talked on previous episodes about the New York State farm brewery license and what that means. Obviously you need to use a certain percentage of ingredients that are grown here in New York State, but it also gives you a license to sell other New York State created products, things like cider and wine, which, from a commercial standpoint is really a great thing. And so, but that creates, in terms of hops and in terms of malt, some requirement that a certain percentage of the things that you make use those New York State ingredients. Talk to me about using New York State craft malt and, how you went about evaluating malt that was going to work for you, because even though you need to use this for legal purposes, but you also need to make beer that people want to drink and that is going to hit that kind of creative goal that you have.
Started with a Google search, looked for the closest malt house to me. I wanted the freshest, most local grains possible. Hudson Valley Malt in Germantown, New York was it. I reached out to Dennis and Jeanette, tried their malt, and fell in love. There's a depth of flavor that I have not been able to find in some of these more commercially available malts. And started off with them and continued refining. It's a challenge because every crop year is different and every batch is different. Dennis is floor malting this grain, and there's some beauty in that, some real beauty.
Sure. So that kind of variability definitely poses some challenge. At the same time, in the scope of hazy IPA, you want to balance the malt flavor, malt body, kind of broader mouthfeel that malt provides with the kind of intense hop flavor that these beers provide. And there is such thing as malt that might be too flavorful in that.
Sure.
And so how do you make sure that this hits that kind of sweet spot for you of enough kind of character and feeling, but not too much?
I just sort of go with the flow. I taste the malt. There's some sensory analysis, and I just trust on Dennis's process to give me that base or that soul of the beer that's required.
Cool. Well, let's talk about what that malt ends up being, and how you make some decisions between Pilsner, between two row, and then also in the scope of hazy IPA, think about all of those other kinds of body building malts, oats, wheat, et cetera, that also feed into that. Before we do that, Indie Hops brings Oregon's natural wonder to brewers, celebrating 16 years of delivering compelling new hop varieties along with classics that thrive in Oregon's terroir. Indie is the original source for Strata, Luminosa, Lorien, Meridian, and their newest variety, Audacia. Release your creativity with the magic of pure, uncut Oregon hops from Indie. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And Extra Tough has been making rugged and reliable boots for 75 years, built for the harshest conditions. The Legacy Collection styles are oil, acid, and chemical resistant with a non-slip rated outsole. Be prepared for whatever comes your way and shop the latest Extra Tough boots on extratough.com. That's XTRATUF.com. Also, brewers, have you ever considered brewing with North America's only ancient grain, wild rice? Craft brewers in northern Minnesota have been keeping this a secret for years. Joe at Canoe Wild Rice has a stockpile of this unique roasted grain ready to ship to you. From the waters of Minnesota to your tap room anywhere in the country, you're sure to create an in-demand product. Brewers Blend Wild Rice is the perfect size and texture so it can be added directly into your mash, saving you time in the brewing process. Plus, for over 4 generations, Canoe Wild Rice has been using their time-tested process that gives the wild rice a distinct roasted flavor. Who knows what sensation you could create with this aquatic grain? Canoe Wild Rice also has food-grade hulls available for your mash. Harvest season is underway in Minnesota now, but Joe will make time for you. If you have any questions or want to get an order going, send Canoe Wild Rice an email at joe@canoewildrice.com or give the office a call at 1-800-626-3809. All right, Frank, let's talk, as you start thinking about building a malt recipe for hazy IPA, obviously you start with this craft malt from Hudson Valley Malt, but how do you start building an overall recipe for an hazy IPA?
Of course, you want Pilsner malt, and you've also want protein. So we use malted wheat, flaked oats, and malted oats. And there's some variability in the malted oats. Sometimes there's a husk, and sometimes there's not. You really got to mind the gap. A finer mill with these New York State malts allows you to extract more sugar and also helps grab all that protein out of the mash that I need. And I also have a very slow lauter. My brew day is 10 to 16 hours, usually 10 to 12 hours. I run a really slow lauter and trying to really extract all of that sugar. And the mash is very inefficient. I'm purposely adding more malt than I should so I can get a higher volume of first runnings. That way I can dilute less and thus achieve a thicker and more full-bodied beer.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, especially in the context of this kind of beer style. Although obviously, running lower efficiencies with very expensive craft malt has a cost attached to it, and you have to be able to find the value and then product in order to be able to justify all of those things. In this broader sense, how do you tend to kind of split up the grist bill between your Pilsner base malt and some of the other adjunct malts that you use along with it?
I think right now we're at 62.5% Pils. The rest is split between wheat malt, flaked oats, and malted oats. I've been playing with those percentages a little bit and trying to increase the adjunct malt.
Trying to increase it?
Yeah.
Like you're already with a fine crush and larger amount of adjuncts. You're already in like stuck mash land, trying to fight off that potential. So now you add to that, you're going to make it even worse for yourself.
Absolutely. And we do not use rice hulls.
No.
No.
So what's your secret? How do you manage these challenging mashes other than lautering slow?
It's just time. I'm here by myself and I've got a lot to do. So I let it do its thing and I'm out here doing all the paperwork and whatnot and come back to it. And that's the magic.
And that's it's just that easy. All right.
Sure.
Yeah. And all of these malt ingredients, from wheat and oats are also coming from Hudson Valley Malt. Absolutely.
We use 100% Hudson Valley Malt in all of our beers. And the IPAs are predominantly freestyle hops. But for all of our lagers, it's 100% New York State ingredients, and we use mostly New York State Cascade from New York Hop Guild.
Interesting. So let's keep talking about hazy IPA. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that expression in lager later on, because I do find like there are very few brewers that are like 100% of my malt comes from one place. Like
Sure.
that's a level of commitment that is not often found out there in the world. Inevitably someone's going to say, well, I use all of this malt, but I use Vireman for, yada, yada, yada.
Sure.
Saying you use 100% craft malt in all of your beer, that's a rather bold thing.
You got to support New York State agriculture.
And you also have some, regulatory requirements for, maintaining that kind of ingredient.
That is true.
Percentage and whatnot. And what is that legal? I know it was escalating for a number of years. Now, what is it at its current standpoint?
I believe it's 60%. I knew it was going up to 90, but I think they put a stop on that.
It's pretty hard to make beer in New York State with 90% ingredients.
Absolutely.
For a brewer making Cool Kid Hazy IPA, may be really hard to find the hops that you would need for that kind of thing.
I think it's very challenging to create hazy IPA with New York State hops. I find that New York State hops are more like noble hops, where they're more restrained, there's lower alpha, they're not as expressive. And so to operate in this sphere, you really need those Yakima Valley hops or New Zealand hops or Australian hops to get that sexy, juicy character that you're looking for.
Of course. So you figure out malt here. Where do you go next as you think about your recipe? What's the water like here on Long Island, and how much work do you put into manipulating your water profile?
We are really, really blessed to have soft water in Glen Cove. I send it through a carbon filter and heat it up overnight, just for good measure. And I like a high chloride, low sulfate water profile. We use lactic acid. I'm a big fan of lactic acid. I would use acid malt, but Dennis doesn't make it. But we have soft water. We build it up, and I prefer to have a lower pH. I think that's a big part of setting the beer up for success. A lot of brewers will mash in at 5.2, 5.4, and then they'll adjust in the kettle. But I like to drive everything from the mash. So we've got the calcium chloride, calcium sulfate, and lactic acid to get us down to about 5 in pH. And from there, the beer just carries through, and I don't have to make any further adjustments.
Cool. So then, where do you go? You've now thought about this kind of grist bill, thought about water. Let's talk about hops. In these hazy IPAs, how do you start thinking about, and in fact, when you start designing these beers, you're not really even thinking about that per se. You have some ideas, you have hops in your library. What does hot side hopping then look like for your hazy IPAs?
Very, very minimal. For a 5-barrel batch, I'll probably add about a pound and a half. So really low. I find that the hop character is more important on the dry hop.
When you say you throw a pound in, is that Whirlpool, or do you throw any in before the Whirlpool?
Yeah, all Whirlpool hops, no kettle hops. Find all the bitterness in the dry hop. Just enough hops in the hot side to balance out the beer.
So where do you start making that creative decision? Like, what do you? Yeah, you're making a beer. You have some thought like, okay, I'm going to throw this in the Whirlpool. What's it going to be?
Honestly, whatever I have laying around, everything sort of happens on the fly. I go into the walk-in, I see what I have. Maybe there's a half bag that's vacuum sealed, and I say, this will be good, and throw it in. And it's sort of like a painting. I let the beer become what it wants to be. I don't really brew with much intention. Everything really happens on the fly.
That's interesting, because that is a unusual approach to be just like, hey, what ingredients do I have here? What can I make from that? But that's a kind of spontaneous, IPA approach that I wouldn't say that it's as common out there in the world as a thing. So you then look at what you've got and like, yeah, I think I'll use this in this IPA, and then tell me about the process from there. Then you knock this beer out, you throw it into fermentation. Are you fermenting with London L3?
We used to use imperial juice, and I like adding a little bit of, or I used to like adding a little bit of US 5. Just because I don't like over pitching the London 3. I find that it takes on this sort of almost plasticky, maybe banana-like character. So I like to pitch low on the London 3, but I want to get down to the right gravity. London 3 tends to be a little less attenuative. But since then, I've changed now. We use Lallemand Verdant. I've been playing with Pomona a little bit.
Yeah.
And I do like Pomona, although I find it to be a little variable. Sometimes it gives me the results I want, but it's a very strong fermenter, and sometimes it can bring the gravity a little too low and bring the beer out of spec. So I've been playing around with that a little bit, and sometimes, especially recently, I've been combining the two. A little, mostly Verdant and a little bit of Pomona to just get the gravity down to where I want it to be.
What is it about New York breweries and co-pitching multiple yeasts? I swear, I had that conversation with Grimm. I have had the same kind of co-pitching conversation with Mike Messany and Duchess. Also, I mean, he's not here anymore, but he was when we had that conversation. This using multiple yeasts to kind of tweak and achieve this end, is something that is pretty popular up here.
They all have different characteristics, and if you can grab the best of each and combine them together, it adds a complexity that you can't achieve with just a single variety.
Yeah. Interesting. And so is there anything else that you do to manage that fermentation? Obviously, you're keeping the pitch levels somewhat low. You've got a final gravity goal on a kind of a 7.0, kind of single hazy IPA. What's a typical final gravity goal for that?
I would say it's about 5-6 Plato, sometimes higher. I find that these beers can do better with a sweeter, higher final gravity to balance the heavy dry hop. If you go too low with the gravity, it tends to become too dry and astringent, I find, especially with a lower pH.
There's definitely some association, out there in the untapped world between higher finishing gravity and higher scores. But I think all of that works only, you can just make sweet cloying stuff and it's not going to necessarily get you, a great score out there with consumers. You also need to have other balancing factors in the beer itself. And so, as we talk about finishing gravity, it's only in the scope of also, the amount of bitterness that's there, also the character of the water, and obviously, how that malt and mouthfeel also play into that. So in this sense, as you then think about you go through this fermentation, your goal is ultimately 5 to 6, Plato on this. After that fermentation, you start or during that fermentation, you tell me, like, when does dry hopping begin?
At the end of fermentation, I'll bung the tank. We spun all of our beers, and I'll soft crash the beer, bring it down from about 66.5 down to 60. I usually wait overnight for the yeast to settle out, dump the yeast, and then dry hopping usually happens in 2 stages. I split it up that way because I find that if you throw all of the hops in at once, then the yeast that's in suspension will pull out a lot of that hop oil and resin. And so I want to get that initial hop load in there to drop anything out that might come out. And then from there, I'll throw more hops on to sort of give it that top end note.
So you're using your sacrificial hops on the first one. They're going to add something, but they're going to take away a lot, and that's that's that goal of that first stage, and then hit it with a harder second stage once some of that stuff that's going to precipitate out is already precipitated out.
To some degree, yes. There's still some character that's retained, but I find that if I throw some really juicy, sexy hops in the first dry hop, I tend to lose some of that character that I'm looking for.
So then is your first stage dry hopped with that in mind, that some of these are going to be sacrificial? And so, so you're saving some of the sexier, juicier hops for the second stage of the dry hop?
If I know I have a really nice lot of hops, I'll wait to throw that in till the end. And there's different hops that I find are more like supporting hops. Say peacherine, love peacherine, but I wouldn't make an all peacherine beer. And I certainly wouldn't have it be that top end note. It's a great hop to throw in the beginning or the first stage of the dry hop and set yourself up to then add that second.
All right. Well, so let's talk about those hops then. Obviously you say you riff on it, but also you're very consciously selecting those ingredients that you're going to have in the cooler for you to pull out when you need them to be ready for you. And so, how do you then think about that from starting with that whirlpool? Like, are there specific hops that you more frequently use in the whirlpool because they convey or even start setting a better stage for what you'll eventually dry hop with?
Because I don't add a lot of whirlpool hops, I tend to gravitate towards hops that have a higher alpha just so I can get that bitterness in. But honestly, a lot of the times it's just whatever I have laying around, or sometimes I'll open up a bag and it doesn't really give me that bag appeal that I want, and then I'll reserve that for the hot side. And then I have that in store to then use and put into the dry hop.
Are there some specific varieties that that tend to find their way more often than others into that kind of hot side, whirlpool side?
Not really, although lately I have been enjoying Enigma for the hot side.
Enigma? Really?
Yeah, it's got a little bit of a higher alpha, and some of the better beers I've put out recently have had that in the hot side. Or in the whirlpool, I should say.
The whirlpool, right. So then, as you're looking for higher alpha hops that are going to add some of that, are you manipulating the whirlpool in any way, say lowering temperature to cool pool around that to also fight against adding that bitterness? Because efficiency, we've already decided, is completely out the window. How do you approach that whirlpool?
To be honest, I don't really boil much. Very light boil. I want to have very low heat stress. So sometimes I won't even get to the boil. It really depends upon what's happening during the brew. But because of that, it ends up being somewhere between 190 to 200 degrees. And I find that carries enough bitterness, but also flavor in the whirlpool. But nothing crazy, just throw it in there and spin it for 10 minutes, let it rest for 15, and then send it through the heat exchanger.
It's no challenge with like DMS precursors through that whole boil piece, or?
I think that's largely dogma. I've been doing it like that for years now, and I really haven't had too many issues with DMS. Now, for lagers, I will definitely boil for 90 minutes, and I just think that's from my old school of thought.
Sure.
But I sort of let it ride with the hot side. And honestly, that was born from stuck mashes and being here late at night, and I just want to go home, and I say, screw it. I won't boil, and I'll send it in. And some of the best beers that I've made have come from that. Like Psychedelic Dinosaur, the first Psychedelic Dinosaur, no boil, and it blew everyone's mind. And I said, wow, I can save time. I can reduce the heat stress on the beer. Let's send it.
From a sensory and flavor standpoint, what does that heat stress actually do to this kind of beer, hazy IPA?
If the idea is to retain all of the protein in the liquid, the more heat that you apply, the more the protein wants to coagulate. And pH also is a major factor in all of that. The lower pH, you'll have smaller flocks. Higher pH, you'll have larger flocks. I've had golf ball and softball size flocks of protein, and with that, it pulls out all the protein. So the less amount of heat applied, the less protein gets coagulated. And also I find that the more heat stress, the darker the wort becomes. And so everyone in the hazy IPA world wants a very low SRM, very light color of their beer. And when you boil for a long time, it makes the beer darker.
Yeah. Interesting. So then your whirlpool can generally start at a slightly lower temperature, but it's pretty fast. So you're not intentionally dropping down to 180 or 170. You're just, likely getting a lower temperature whirlpool just because you're not starting at that higher temperature.
Exactly. And also there's a little bit of heat loss through the hoses and the pump and just letting it spin as I gather my adjunct sugar and my whirlpool hops. So there is a little bit of reduction in temperature that happens.
Yeah, and it's still a small system, so the whirlpool can happen faster than it may happen on, someone who's trying to drain a 50 or 60 barrel tank, and over that where it just takes more time to get that kind of larger volume of liquid out there.
Sure.
Anything else to the kind of whirlpool process other than to say that like your brew kit is pretty manual and and so all of this is work that you are doing to make all of these things happen at that moment. It is not a simple thing of hitting a button and opening up a valve. Like, this is it is a hands-on brewing process there.
Very much so. I'm connecting all the hoses and doing all the work. And I guess one thing I can say is that I actually switch pumps. I have a lower strength pump that transfers the wort from the mash tun to the boil kettle, but then I end up switching out the pump for a stronger pump so I can get a stronger whirlpool and then send it through the heat exchanger faster.
Interesting. Makes sense. So then, let's keep following this process forward, and let's, we've talked about dry hopping in 2 stages now, and your sacrificial dry hop process. Let's talk about when you start making hop decisions, because, for a lot of brewers out there, the hops that you choose to include in this, they resonate with consumers and they have meaning to them. How do you then start thinking about the hop flavors and aromas that you're pulling into these beers as you're making them? Because, again, these are not decisions you're making before you start the brew. They're decisions you're making as you go through the brew. Talk to me about how you make those decisions.
I sort of have a catalog of what each hop lends to the beer in my mind. And I know the good combinations. Peacherine Rawaka is one of them. Southern Cross, Waimea is another. But people get tired of the same combos, so oftentimes I find myself going through the walk-in and saying, what do I have? What's new? What would be interesting? I'm part of the Hop Research Collective, Freestyle, so they send me different varieties periodically. And sometimes I incorporate those and see how they fit into the whole mix. But oftentimes it's just what I'm feeling in the moment, to be perfectly honest.
What I'm feeling in the moment. It's so much inspiration.
It's sort of like a painting. You just let the beer become what it wants to be, instead of brewing with intention, and then you sort of pigeonhole yourself. I find that every time I brew with intention, the beer never comes out quite the way that I want it. But if I just sort of let it be, then it becomes this beautiful painting.
That's a hard philosophical concept to truly employ because there's always the hand of the artist at play in that, right? And that, if you think about the abstract expressionists who were attempting the same kind of thing, they focused on eliminating brush strokes, like how we can take the hand of the artist out of this and just let the painting become what it is, and finding new avenues there. But ultimately it's incredibly hard because you still are making creative decisions around that, and you still want, the composition, the structure, the balance, all of those pieces, to be there. And so you still have to think about those kinds of elements, even, as you make decisions through the beer.
I mean, I rely on the ingredients heavily, and then it really comes down to process. And I think a large part of it is, I sort of treat it like a Venn diagram where you're balancing the final gravity, the pH, and the hop load. The hop load will raise the pH, but not all hops are the same. And I sort of don't really take that into account. It sort of becomes what it wants to be. But so long as I have a high enough final gravity and high enough hop load and the right pH, everything sort of focuses in and you get this flavor expression. If you're too high in pH, I find that the beer becomes quite muddled. And if you're too low, it's too sharp. And so right in the intersection of all of those three variables, the beer becomes more expressive.
That kind of perfect final zone is what for you?
In terms of
pH?
In pH? I would say probably about 4.6, 4.65 are where a lot of these better beers end up.
Yeah.
But the mash and into the fermenter, about 5. Although some of the better beers have been as low as 4.8. So I'm still trying to figure that out, and it could be a faulty or uncalibrated pH meter.
All right. That's just, that's the nature of a very, very small brewery here. So let's talk about those blends as you're thinking about it from an artistic perspective, and, how you're building and growing this, and not just thinking about what I have in stock, how I can move certain things, and, what on the tap board have we not had a mix of before? How do you then think about those flavors? You mentioned you have some ideas, some mental kind of pictures of some of these hops. How do you then conceive of how they might blend together, and then, how do you select lots, or at least, request lots that are going to feed into what you expect them to be, or even work in when you do have some of those lots that might vary from the way that those same hops have felt to you in the past. How do you then recalibrate your own mental process and shorthand for that so that you are thinking about it creatively in the right kind of way?
Well, we're a small brewery, so we do not get to select our lots. So I'm sort of at the mercy of freestyle hops, which we predominantly use freestyle hops, although I've been wanting to incorporate some more domestics back into the beers. So I think part of the problem is that because we're so small, we don't really have the budget to get all these different varieties. So I tend to just use freestyle, but I want to branch out and maybe throw in some Crosby, Columbus, or some Cryo or Lupo Max.
That's really interesting. So, in terms of hoppy beers and hazy IPA, you're almost exclusively at this point using New Zealand hops?
For the last 2 years or so.
Really?
Yeah, almost exclusively. There was a beer recently we put out, Vigilant Foe, which had some Mosaic in it. And I thought it did really well. The Mosaic was really stinky and really expressive. And I'd like to incorporate some more of that.
How does Citra figure into all of this?
Citra is a tough hop because it's very popular and there's a lot that's grown, and all the big boys get the nice lots. So it's always a gamble for me with Citra. When it's good, but sometimes I get some bags that are questionable, and then they end up being the Whirlpool hops.
But not as big of a hop that figures into the overall program.
I tend not to use too much Citra. I would, but I tend not to.
All right. Well, we found the one hazy IPA brewer that is not using Citra and Mosaic as a base for most of their hazy IPAs.
I find that the New Zealand hops also help with the haze, especially Rawaka and Peacherine. There's just these polyphenols that make the beer look really murky. I agree with Steve from Fidens that Mosaic has an effect of darkening the beer, and but I still use it I've still used it because I wanted to branch out.
So there's a little bit of American hops that find their way into these.
More recently, yeah. Historically, I've liked Idaho 7.
Really?
Especially on the hot side. There was that paper that came out about
the survivables chart, yeah.
And I think there's something to that. I also like the Idaho 7 Cryo. And also Comet CGX is killer. And I'd like to bring that back. It's a little expensive, though.
Sure. What have been, in your mind, as you then taste these finished things that you have made through this kind of improvisational process, what have you found that have ultimately been the most successful? What are those things that you've blended not knowing that they were going to work out as well, but then tasted after the fact and been like, holy crap, this does exactly what I wanted it to do? And, what have been some of those most kind of successful hop blends for you?
Off the top of my head, definitely Peacherine Rawaka. That's like the number one blend. I'd put it in all the beers if I could, but it gets kind of old. So also there was one. What
is it about that Peacherine Rawaka that you love so much?
They just balance each other out really well. The Rawaka is diesel-y and fruity and floral and aggressive, but the Peacherine provides this sort of supporting hop background fruitiness that really complements the aggressiveness of the Rawaka. There's another beer. It was the first Mysterious Forces Waimea, and it was an all Waimea beer, and I had blended different lots of Waimea into that beer, and it was just very expressive. And I don't think I'll ever be able to replicate that beer. There were so many things about it. It finished high. I ended up pitching more yeast after the fact, which I usually never do. And there was just something about the intersection of all of those, of the yeast and the hops, that made it just a really amazing beer.
Interesting. Are there any other, hops that have been surprising for you, or that either in a positive way or in a, hey, maybe we won't do that again kind of way?
Not too many. We won't do them, but I've really fell in love with Southern Cross.
Yeah.
That's a total sleeper hop.
Huh.
I mean, I open up that bag and whoa. And it's not that expensive, and it's stinky, and I would use that on the second dry hop a lot because it has this nice fruity quality. Same thing with New Zealand Cascade. I mean, I know when I open up a bag of that, it's going to be good from Freestyle, so far at least.
For sure. Those Freestyle late hop late pick extra saturated brewer friendly, kind of hop picks.
Come to think of it, I've had trouble with Eclipse.
Yeah.
Sometimes it would be overbearing in, like, if I add an 11-pound bag, it's too much. But if I back off on it, say 5.5 pounds, it would lend this really nice character to the beer. It's kind of like salt in a stew. If you add too much, it's too salty. But if you just add a little bit, it really opens up and becomes very expressive.
So how do you get best results out of this? Now, obviously you've got small tanks. And so, your biggest tank is a 5-barrel fermenter. And so we're not talking about massive volumes of hops, but at the same time, you also don't want to lose a whole lot of volume because you've got 5 barrels of that beer. Like you want to, it's a small business. You need to sell as much beer as you can, and so you want to balance that kind of efficiency with that kind of intensity of expression. Then, are there any other processes, to your dry hop that you use to promote the kind of positive extraction there?
Just making sure that the beer isn't too cold. I like to dry hop around 60. I find that if
60 is cold.
Yeah, I mean, for many it's 66 and a half.
Okay.
So I only drop like 5 degrees. I find that if I'm down in the 50s, I don't necessarily get the extraction that I want, or maybe it takes a little bit longer.
Right.
I know that's up for debate.
How much contact time, for dry hops through that process?
Usually about 3 days.
3 days.
3 days per dry hop. So I do it in 2 stages, 3 days each. Sometimes less or more.
2 stages of 3 days each. Well, that's a lot of contact time.
Yeah, I guess that's also up for debate. We also spund, so I find that when there's a lot of CO2 in solution, it takes maybe just a little bit longer to extract. But I've definitely been playing around with that and trying to push the beer out a little faster. But I really think the beer waits for no one, and it's ready when it's ready.
So the challenge on that is, again, longer contact time, in typical parlance, people would associate that with, additional kind of harsher polyphenol extraction and, the dreaded kind of herbal hop burn that then comes from that kind of, intense extraction. How do you manage that in the scope of these beers, given that much contact time?
I haven't really experienced too much of that, honestly. So I've just always done it that way and got good results. So yeah, it hasn't been an issue thus far. One challenge has been, we used to have a 2-barrel brew house, and then we upgraded to the 5. It used to be, we would be at 5.5 pounds per barrel. But now that I have 5-barrel tanks, I kind of want that extra barrel. So I've been pushing it higher with another 11-pound bag. And that brings it to 6.6 pounds per barrel. And so I've been playing around with that and trying to juggle the yield and the hop expression. And sometimes I find that 6.6 is a little too much. But sometimes the 5.5 isn't enough. So lately I've been doing 2 11-pound bags and maybe another 5.5 pounds on top of it. And getting good results. So really trying to figure out the volume and the dry hopping rate.
Is that hop dependent? Are there certain hops that you just need to crank a little bit more of into there?
Some more than others, I suppose. I mean, you really got to know your ingredients. It's hard to say, though, because I don't get to pick the lots. So every bag I open is sort of like the lotto. It's sort of a surprise. And sometimes I'll open up a bag and go, nah, it's not cutting it. And then I'll end up vacuum sealing it. And then I'll open up another bag and sort of go from there.
Well, you're small enough to, again, make those decisions on the fly and divert stuff into that whirlpool if you don't feel like it's going to be the dry hop for you. And since you are one of 2 brewhouse employees right now, and then it's not like you need to communicate this out with the entire team to make those decisions on the fly, which again is a strategic advantage of brewing at this kind of scale. You're the chef. You get to make the decisions, right? You get to taste the dish and make the adjustments as it's cooking.
That's the beauty in it. And it gives me a lot of versatility, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some other beer styles then, Frank. Maybe before we do that, let's talk about double IPA. How does your double IPA process with hazy IPA, vary from your single IPA process? Is this just a linear scale up? There's going to be a little bit more, or is there more residual sugar in the beer? Do you finish at a higher gravity? Do you finish at a lower gravity? Because there are some brewers out there with hazy IPA that actually scale their double IPAs lower in finishing gravity than their singles.
When I'm trying to push a higher ABV, I used to add dextrose, but I found that would drop the beer too low. And so now
that just ferments too well.
Yeah, now I use brewer's crystals and sometimes a little bit of honey. But I try
the
not...
old Trillium cutting tiles kind of thing, huh?
I haven't heard of that.
Oh, Cutting Tiles is a phenomenal beer, and also incorporates honey into the double IPA process.
I try to add the least amount of adjunct sugar. I find that too much adjunct sugar creates this type of alcohol that makes me sleepy, which is strange. But oftentimes, my approach is having a lower yield. And I will add adjunct sugar, but I try to keep it at around 10%. 15, 20, I don't know. It's not my jam. So I'll end up brewing less of a double IPA or a higher ABV beer, just so that I can add less adjunct sugar and sort of retain more of that gravity from the wort.
Sure. Well, let's think about big picture then. This is going to be the toughest question of the podcast so far.
Sure.
You've got two beers that, in terms of Untapped ratings and their community awards, are two of the three highest rated hazy IPAs in the United States for the entire year of 2024. That implies a level of quality and expression and interest that, that's extraordinary. If you were to try to unpack what it is that's driving that factor of excellence in your hazy IPA, is there a thing? Are there a couple of things? What do you think some of those most important factors are that is expressing this idea of excellence, and helping those beers rise above not just of, some general level that people expect from hazy IPA, but even rising significantly above that into this tier of, highly respected, highly influential hazy IPA?
It comes down to ingredients, process, and attention to detail above all. It also is a matter of proportion. I think a lot of brewers are brewing for efficiency and brewing for inefficiency and getting the highest volume of first runnings of unadulterated wort really sets the stage for the beer to be expressive and full-bodied and undiluted in a sense. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think it does. And I think that, the scale and the size of the brewery affords that kind of thing. And you can lean into that and make each one of these beers exactly what you want it to be. As saturated, as intense, as expressive, and as bold as people expect it to be. Anyway, I appreciate you sharing, that kind of approach to making these beers. It's a hard thing, to really pull apart. And, and of course, anyone who is as successful as you are at making them has a lot to lose by telling everyone else how they make these things. But
even if I always say that if you and I had the same level of experience and the same setup and the same ingredients, we would still produce wildly different beers because there's a human element to it. And every little thing adds up. Inevitably, the beer that you produce will be different. So I could tell you all the secrets, and good luck, because we're using different inputs and we have different processes, and there's so many little untold things that all add up to make the beer. So there's no secrets.
Great. Well, so on that note, you're just going to share a homebrew recipe with our audience, right? Right, Frank?
Sure.
I'm going to hold you to it. And that's a great place to bring it to a close. G&D Chillers chills the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across North America and beyond. Berkeley Yeast bioengineers ordinary strains to make them extraordinary. Old Orchard is your one-stop shop for flavoring beer and beyond. Release your creativity with the magic of pure, uncut Oregon hops from Indy. Extra Tough has been making rugged and reliable boots for 75 years. And reach out to Canoe Wild Rice and try brewing with their unique roasted grain. If you've enjoyed this episode, go to beerandbrewing.com, hit that subscribe button, become a subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing, and help support us in our mission to bring you the best education, inspiration, technical process, viewpoints, and everything else from the best breweries around the country and around the world. Frank, if people want to learn more about Noble Savage and the beers you make, and maybe line up and buy some cans sometime, or come here in the tap room and have some on draft, where do they find you, both in real life and out there on the digital space?
I'm here at the tasting room waiting for you 24/7. The best way is follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Noble Savage Brew Co. That's honestly the best way.
All right. Well, I appreciate you sharing your approach to brewing with us. Cheers.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.